Hey, what's good? I'm Kinell and this is Sinister Cinema, where we get deep into the guts of classics and new releases from horror and exploitation cinema. Be sure to follow us up on the socials, that's Sinister_Cinema on your Twitter and Sinister.Cinema on your Insta. I've been a bit quiet lately, I've been doing some other stuff. As I said, I've been in the Don't Flop Think Twice tournament, which I won. And that's paid for a new laptop. And so far, everything on this channel has been done on phones and an Android tablet, and so is this, because the laptop hasn't arrived yet. But here we are. I was going to wait till it arrives, and maybe I'm going to do a bit more with the editing. You know, maybe try and use a proper thing instead of an Android app. But I had something ace drop through the door today, so I'm going to show you a little bit about that. It is the Vinegar Syndrome The Fear release. Now, this is a horror film from 1995, and it's one that's very, very particularly close to my heart, because it was one of the first films that really it was one of the only horror films that really used horrorcore rap on the soundtrack, which I'm a big fan of. You know, obviously being a battle rapper with a fucking horror channel, you could probably guess that. But horrorcore rap's something that's been kind of demonized over the years, and I think a lot of people only think of it in terms of the cartoonish, insane clown Posse type stuff. But it's unfair to do that, because it influenced a lot more than people have ever given it credit for. Yeah, I'll get into that when we get to the soundtrack. But anyway, yeah, The Fear. I first came across this film when I was a teenager, and back then my main source of getting hold of horror films when I was too young to get into the cinema was the Beast Market in Wrexham. There was a van there, and the guy who had the van would have all these plastic crates full of X-rental VHS's, and that's what I used to get, because he did not give a shit about selling a fucking 12-year-old a film with lots of sex and violence in. Did not give a monkeys. So that was it, that was what I was getting. I was getting X-rental copies of classic slashers and all these kind of things, some of which have gone on to be cult classics, some not so much. But around this time I was also very much into hip-hop, and I was very much into sort of Wu-Tang, Cypress Hill, these kind of things there. And a lot of that would sort of intertwines with horrorcore. Now, The Fear itself, this is it. It has been reissued, and amazing looking remaster by Vinegar Syndrome. And it concerns a psychology student who takes a bunch of his friends to a cabin in the woods, and shit goes tits up. Now, as it looks from the packaging, and indeed the packaging of the time, and the trailer, and the marketing of the time, all of that kind of stuff, everyone thought it was just going to be about this Morty character. Because around then everyone was trying to find the new Freddy, because the old Freddy, dead. So it was all about trying to find a new character and something. Because this was really this was 1995 this was released. So we're at the absolute tail end of the initial slasher movie cycle. All the big franchises had run out of steam quite badly, tried to reinvent themselves, gone in some weird directions. You know, the horror was generally being straight to video, you know, for studios that were still pushing out the numbers were people like your Full Moons, all this kind of thing. Full Moon, and basically there wasn't much of a market for cinema horror at this point in time. But yeah, so The Fear came at a time when people weren't really looking for this kind of film, and because it's 1995, we're about a year away from Scream coming out and revitalising it with a whole new wave of slasher films, which bring in their own set of tropes. You'd have the sort kind of meta approach, the kind of awareness of tropes of horror films, all this kind of thing, and you'd have people that were people like stars from TV, you know, obviously initially you had Nev Campbell from Party of Five, all this kind of thing, and that's something that the post-Scream wave, your I Know What You Did Last Summers, your I Know What You Did Last Summers, your fucking, what was the other one? Urban Legend. I'll be covering that soon. The Urban Legend box set is out from 88 Films, so I'll be copying one of them. All these kind of things through to your Valentines, and it gets cheaper and cheaper. You've always got to have some kind of familiar TV star in them, and it's more sort of aimed at a teen audience. And this affects the content because, you know, some of the kills ain't quite going so hard, and because you're using these established stars, you know, you're not getting as much nudity when, you know, a lot of the films from the 80s, they just book an actress who would get their tits out in order to get their tits out. That dies off at this point. But The Fear, very much the tail end of the 80s, early 90s cycle. And it didn't get a cinema release over here, but it did in America, and it did alright. But a lot of people weren't really feeling it. I think it was because they thought it was going to be this, this Morty character. I've actually got the soundtrack CD here, by the way, and I've owned this for many years. This Morty character here just hunting people down in a cabin. But that's not what the film is. It's a psychology student, and it's kind of an ensemble piece, and all these characters got their own backstories, insecurities, phobias, and it's kind of playing on that. There's a lot of subplots, which does make it kind of a clunky film in a lot of places. It's like 100 odd minutes, and it's kind of too long for what this kind of film should be. But there's so many characters with so much shit going on. It's kind of, it'd be confusing if it wasn't, but as a result of which you've got some pacing problems, and we don't see a proper kill till way into this film. And the climax was absolutely banging. They could get there a lot quicker. But yeah, speaking on my relationship with it, you know, I was a young kid who was into hip-hop and cheap rock weed and horror films. Like, horrorcore was something that I naturally gravitated towards. And it was kind of came into its own in the 90s. There were earlier examples, but I think the 90s is the point at which it really comes into its own. Like, what I say when I mean horrorcore is that it's hip-hop music with very much a horror aesthetic. There's a lot of imagery in the lyrics. It's very descriptive. Like, there's elements of storytelling and otherworldly stuff, or in some cases, like describing, like, say, gangland activity, but escalating it and giving it this kind of like gothic overture, and you'd see it in the artwork. So, like, to me, true horrorcore is when the artists, the rappers themselves, were influenced by horror movies. But obviously there'd been some kind of crossover before. I mean, like, back at the back end of the 80s, a lot of rap music was popping up in horror films, and it was put on the soundtracks because at this point, like, studios had realised that the franchise slashers, etc., had a big black following, so they just put rap music in there. But this isn't what I consider true horrorcore. If you like, look on Wikipedia, it points you in the direction of things like, as the origin, things like the Fat Boys, Are You Ready for Freddy, which was off the soundtrack for Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Now, this isn't really it. To me, this is just like a normal Fat Boys song, but they're rapping about Freddy. And there's nothing particularly scary about the lyrics. They've got a pretty dreadful bit with Robert Englund doing some very slow single syllable rapping, and the Fat Boys, well, how they rap sounds kind of stupid in retrospect, to be honest. It's that kind of, I'd describe their flow as the Swedish chef from the Muppets beatboxing the intro to Belle Biv DeVoe's Poison. You know that? Yeah, that flow. I accept they're very influential, but that wasn't it. You'll also hear references to A Nightmare on My Street by Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. This one wasn't tied into a film. It wasn't tied into a film, but it's a comedic sort of storytelling kind of tale with Will Smith rapping about. bumping into Freddy Krueger. Again, whilst it's referenced as an early horrorcore track, I don't see it as such, and the reason is because it was just a normal Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince tune. It didn't really have the aesthetics. I'd say when we really start getting into it is one of the first proper examples I'd say is the Ghetto Boys from down south with My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me. Now, My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me, this song is kind of like, it's about a gangster drug dealer describing issues he's having where he's hallucinating and he's seeing people that aren't there out to kill him. And this the kind of imagery and what he's describing is something that would go on to form the basis of horrorcore. And you know, with a minor key sample based, it's still kind of dirty south, but the minor key sample based instrumental that he's rapping over, like, this is where it really starts to happen. And lately, around the early 90s, we start seeing a more sinister form of hardcore rap. We see what the Wu-Tang Clan are doing, and we've got Cypress Hill. Cypress Hill, like, certainly I'd say, like, a lot of people don't like to lump them in with horrorcore, but to me, it's kind of unavoidable. Not so much the first album, the second album, Black Sunday, when that starts happening, yeah, that's where it's there. You can see it, the skulls on the covers, all this kind of thing. And we see a few emergencies of the tropes. Now, the soundtrack itself to The Fear, as I say, this is my original copy I've had for years. It contains a lot of really big artists in this sort of subsection of hip hop. Like, most notably, we've got Asham. Now, Asham appears multiple times on the soundtrack and actually did a song specifically for this film, The Fear, Morty's theme. It's also got another track of his called Rocks Off. Now, a lot of people might not be familiar with Asham himself, but you will be familiar with people that have been influenced by him. He's a Detroit artist. He was a very big influence on Eminem. Asham described his style as acid rap, and acid rap is basically what we consider horrorcore. It's a spooky imagery. He's got this creepy tone to his voice. You know, you've got these like dirty, grimy, minor key, heavy sample-based instrumentals, and he's just talking about evil shit, all this kind of thing. So yeah, he was a key part in that. And as I say, obviously, I'm a battle rapper. Now, a lot of battle rappers will point to horrorcore influences such as Rhyme Asylum. I mean, when I'm referring to battle rappers, I don't mean so much the strand of battle rap that evolved out of Smack DVD and URL and mixtape bars being spat at each other in the street, that kind of thing. I'm talking about the sort of lineage that came out from the freestyle era. I'm talking Scribble Jam, which of course Eminem enters as before he even started rapping. Lost a lot of fucking battles because he can't fucking freestyle. But wasn't that nice off the top end at the time in the battles? He was kind of notorious for using riffs, but that's beside the point. He was coming in, he was very much influenced by Asham. And obviously a lot of people got into battle rap. Their first taste of it was 8 Mile. So, you know, from people taking part in the Scribble Jam lineage, Don't Flop, which would lead on to Grind Time, Jump Off, which would lead on to Grind Time, which would lead on to Don't Flop, which would lead on to King of the Dot. All the acts from there, a lot of them come from this lineage. So even if you aren't rating horrorcore as such, like if you're rating Eminem, if you're rating a lot of the battle rappers from that King of the Dot, Don't Flop axis, you know, you're rating guys who are influenced by the guy, who are influenced by the guy, who are influenced by the guy. So it's like that. But yeah, horrorcore for me was my shit as a fucking teenager. Notably, another appearance on the soundtrack is Gravediggers. Now, Gravediggers was a side project / supergroup put together by Wu-Tang Clan's RZA and Prince Paul from Stetsasonic, and fucking produced countless fucking classics. But yeah, Gravediggers, in the same way the Wu-Tang Clan had their mythology that evolved from Kung Fu films, with the Gravediggers, it came from horror. and that's where I really think the real horrorcore is. It's not adjacent to horror. The artists themselves are influenced by horror movies. So, you know, another thing I should have mentioned earlier is like you'd have artists like Kool Moe Dee and stuff appearing on like Nightmare on Elm Street 5 and Houdini, and they might do a little video with people dressed as Freddy dancing, but they were just hip hop tunes. They weren't influenced by horror. But yeah, when we get to like people like the Gravediggers and of course Cypress Hill, all this kind of thing, that's the point of we get artists influenced by it, that put that horror influence is explicitly on show, and so that would make it the ideal music for horror films in that context. But at this time, as I say, this is the end of the cycle. Horror films are on the wane, so certainly commercially, although I understand this did bits in the box office but wasn't so well reviewed because people were just expecting it to be a lot more stalk and slashery. So this was the only one that really did it right, because obviously Scream reboots the whole concept of what we think a flipping slasher film or horror film is the next year, and because of the teen audience, it's fucking alt rock and latterly new metal towards the middle of that cycle, which would a new metal would go on into the torture porn cycle, which was the next sort of cycle to kick in. So that's why The Fear was the only one that really did this style well. And yeah, there's other artists on here like that are worth noting. Some of the lesser known artists like Flatliners, and we've also got different. We got a few. Who have we got here? We got a few Half Pit tracks on here, and there's one particularly notably, Half Pit and Machete. Now this one kind of uses a dancehall influence in terms of you've got like a ragga vocal along with the regular rap vocal. Now this was a thing that happened quite a lot in horrorcore, like Cypress Hill. The first ones I would have been aware of that sort of used this trope was I'd say actually Ice-T, a tune he did with Daddy Nitro on the Home Invasion album called Depths of Hell. Whilst Ice-T, not a horrorcore artist, this track certainly has that feel to it. And Cypress Hill did it with things like The Ship Goes Down, again off the Black Sunday album. So like dancehall vocals were kind of like actually quite common in this style. Another artist who isn't really a horrorcore artist, but certainly did tracks that to me feel in that genre, is Ice Cube. He used a dancehall vocalist in Wicked, which I think is it off Lethal Injection or Death Certificate? I think it might be Death Certificate. And like again, Ice Cube, whilst not a horrorcore artist as such, I definitely feel he was influenced by this style. There's a lot of his tracks, certainly Natural Born Killers with Dr. Dre. Obviously with the Dre production, there's a bit more of a G-Funk sound to the instrumental, but in terms of what he's talking about being a serial killer, stalking the streets, and kind of like tie in the post NWA sort of street life gangster rap vocals into a more otherworldly horror film aesthetic, much like Cypress Hill also did, and that kind of makes those tracks horrorcore to me, certainly. And indeed there was a lot of beef between Cypress Hill and Ice Cube, like that went on for years, because he sort of started doing these kind of things. I think he was getting a lot of stuff produced by the Bomb Squad, sort of post NWA, who were sort of Public Enemy's production outfit and all this kind of thing. And they were making instrumentals that were very similar to DJ Muggs' productions in Cypress Hill. But yeah, it's also worth mentioning, while we're at it, should talk about Insane Clown Posse. Now, this is not really the end of horrorcore that I like, but it's the kind of, it's the area where people are sort of most familiar, because we know about juggalos and clown makeup and all this thing, and a very much more cartoony interpretation of horrorcore, you know. And again, they're an act that, like, it's not wrong to say that to a certain subsection of fans, they are the most important act in hip-hop. They have their own festivals that run to this day, the Gathering of the Juggalos, and they're co-signed by a lot of people. And to a lot of people, they're just ridiculous, and they consider them almost sort of a parody of hip-hop. And it's not unfair to say that there's certainly a parody element to it, which doesn't sit right with a lot of fucking hip-hop fans. It is one of them. I do believe that a lot of, what should we call it? You don't fucking meet many people who like both, say, for example, Nas, classic Nas, that kind of thing, Gangstar, these kind of things, that also like Insane Clown Posse. Insane Clown Posse fans tend to be more open to hip-hop, but they tend to... It's a weird thing. I'm not going to go off on the sort of subculture of Juggalos, but yeah, that's what it fucking is. But yeah. So I'm going to pull it linear, but yeah, that's the soundtrack. So obviously, I mean, like, I haven't got no notes on this shit. This is just what I know about the genre off the top of my head. This is how influential it was on me. So I'll talk about the film. This Vinegar Syndrome release, I've got the slipcase, and I know, fucking, like, personally, I'm not too bothered about slipcases. But when I go in Vinegar Syndrome collectors groups, and fucking any kind of collectors groups for Blu-rays on the internet, people go nuts for a fucking slipcover. They fucking take it incredibly seriously. I don't think they even watch the films. I think they just want the little cardboard bit that goes around the fucking outside. But anyway, yeah, the film itself might not be for everyone, even though I love it. If I'm going to take a critical stance, it does roll on a bit too long. I think the original marketing, which made it look like it was just like a cabin in the woods killer film, fucking, when you get into it, there's a lot more of a psychology aspect to it. There's shit going on, there's weird incestuous subplots, and there's well, it would be, because it's a psychologist, isn't it? So, you know, it's Freud, it's wanting to shag your mum, it's wanting to kill your mum, it's thinking you did kill your mum. It's all this kind of thing. And we're also got a lot in the air with phobias and shit. And, like, the cabin's a great location. And they've all fucking... And for some reason, a lot of it also takes place at this nearby Christmas village. And I think they had the location, kind of wrote it around it. Because it just doesn't make sense why they'd fucking, like, decide to go there. But I remember looking at this Christmas village when I first saw it, the film as a kid, and thinking, fucking hell, they've obviously made it just before it. But I just watched a documentary that's on this Vinegar Syndrome release. And that's a real place, and it looks fucking terrifying. So yeah, fucking good spot on fucking finding that for a location. As I say, it's not without its problems. Some people who are more critical, even the ones that are enthusiastic slasher fans, I'm not sure I could recommend this to, because of how long before we get a kill, etc. And maybe it does go on a bit too long, which is a result of having just maybe too many characters. But I fucking love it. VS release itself, fucking absolutely gorgeous. One of the things that Vinegar Syndrome do better than anyone in the fucking world is you will always have the best possible looking copy of the film. This is restored from the original negative, new 4K release, and it looks gorgeous. I've never seen this film look good. All I had was my worn out X-Rental video copy that I kept well into university. I used to put it on all the time. Yeah, so seeing it look this good, I mean, you couldn't get this for ages. Fucking for a while, I think the only copy you could fucking get of it was there was like some shitty. There was some really shitty copy on YouTube, and fucking I don't like going to YouTube things. I think it was a VHS rip and all. So I'm delighted that I can now own a proper copy. Extras wise. Yeah, we got a documentary which I just watched a chunk of, where they're talking with a bit of the original cast and crew. They've got a couple of commentaries which I'm going to be interested in getting into, because as I say, I take this film probably more seriously than anyone in the fucking world, because it was just the right time for me. Like, it was a fucking a year before I was looking old enough to get into cinemas and see things like Scream. So, like, buying these things was all I got. I didn't have good access to bootleg copies. So even though this film doesn't have the most elaborate kills, like the copies of films I was seeing, like The Burning or whatever, would be the VIPCO releases that would be butchered to fuck for violence and stuff, like really unsubtle edits. So, you know, it just felt like a horror film should be to me. But yeah, fucking, so whilst it might not be the best representation of horror films to a lot of people, I think it's notable for what it is. It's certainly got a big place in my heart, and I think it's definitely worth checking out if you are interested in this sort of in the netherworld between the burst of the slasher bubble at the end of the 80s and the revitalization with Scream, the weird never period when horror films were coming out, but they were all trying to launch the next franchise or whatever, and they never really managed to pull it off. And like, even at that time, I remember the letter pages in horror magazines like Shivers and Dark Side. People were complaining that the new horror films just weren't as good as the old 80s stuff. People were complaining about the shit as it was coming out. So it was very difficult to sell a horror film this time. So it's a very interesting little time capsule for that. And as I say, the soundtrack fucks. It bangs. Personally, I would recommend this. I will say it's absolutely astonishing how quick I got it. I ordered this from Vinegar Syndrome in Connecticut on Friday morning. It's Monday, and now I got a copy. I'm fucking delighted, and I just watched it, and it's fucking brilliant. So yeah, I could swear because I'm not monetized. But yeah, anyway, so that's my review of that. Before I wrap things up, if you've watched till this far, and I dare say a lot of people won't have bothered, so big up yourself for making it all the way to this end of the video. Hopefully I'll have a laptop by the time I put some more content up. I'll be doing that more regularly, because now, it was taking up a lot of my time doing that Don't Flop video tournament, but I fucking won, because I do that. I win tournaments because I'm fucking nice. Because I'm influenced by the fear. Yeah, so more content coming up at some point. I'm not going to commit to regular uploads just yet, but yeah, it's one of them. So yeah, follow us up on the social, Sinister_cinema on your Insta and on your Twitter, and Sinister.cinema on your Insta. I'm Kinell. This has been Sinister Cinema. Safe.